Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 236 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to use Hellmod to plan for our cupric and ferric mixtures. Enjoy. Since we're probably going to need more space than this, and I just don't really want to crowd this area here, I'm thinking of just building it over here, because if we build it over here, we can build it in any shape or size we want, because there's nothing out there. The only thing it'll have to line up with is the bus right here. And generally, when you're building new setups, especially setups that replace old ones, it's a good idea to build away from the center of your factory. So if you have anything that needs to get rebuilt, you should build it on the outskirts of your factory, because that will lower the density of machines in the middle and give you more room to expand if necessary. So even if we could potentially rebuild this like we have here and make it all fit in this one little square, there's no real need for it. Plus, we have our 6 belts of ore pointed to the right here, so we might as well keep going to the right. So let's plan it here. And if we go to the sorting methods here, we can see the final sorting types that we want to do. Where we do the ferrous dust to give us 4 iron as the primary item, but also some manganese, nickel, and cobalt. And then the cupric, which is mostly copper, but gives us a little bit of tin, silver, and gold. So let's just hit each of these and say the input is basically 30 per second. We will want to put productivity modules in there to get an even higher output than this. But this is just kind of an idea of what kind of throughput we would need. So we want to handle the dust. Well, we also want to handle the powder and the mixture, because we want our factory to be able to choose which one of these makes the most sense. So you might think that, let's say with ferrous dust, that this is the best option. Well, maybe not. Like, what happens if you just want iron? Well, if you did it this way, you would get iron and manganese, and both of those could be turned into iron, so this is 100% efficient for making iron. But ferrous dust is not, and neither is ferrous powder. So that's kind of why I'm doing all of these different methods, because the higher tier methods aren't strictly superior. They are in the sense of materials, but not necessarily in what you need out of them. Not to mention that more goes into making dust than powder than the mixture. So you want your factory to continue to be able to run, even if you're not necessarily producing every resource at the current time. So we'll just add every one of these in here and just set them all to 30. And of course, if all of these are running, we would get lots of resources. We don't really care about those. We're just kind of getting an input requirement. So let's start with the stuff on the top, the dust. We can get rid of that one so we don't see the drone recipes. So the dust is made from sludge and sodium hydroxide, which our factory does have, and we may need to increase production here. And we get some sulfuric wastewater out of it. And we got to set all these machines to the types that we have. And slam them with speed modules. And then that sludge comes from mixing the ferrous powder, which comes from the previous step, in addition to a chunk of each type, sulfuric acid, and thermal water. So kind of a lot goes into that. Although a lot of it is already on hand. The only thing that isn't particularly nearby is the thermal water. But still, it's kind of a lot of work that goes into that. Let's see, which chemical plants do we have access to? Looks like we do have the tier 3s now. That might have been a new thing with the update. I don't remember using very many tier 3 chemical plants. But nonetheless, we do have it. So I want to make sure to update this. And of course, give it speeds as much as the speeds will help. Because we want to kind of figure out what all of our input requirements are. Because it's kind of interesting that you only need 15 ferrous powder, and then the rest comes in chunk form. And then all of it comes out in dust. So it's possible our 1 belt of each was possibly too much, because it wasn't a 1-to-1 ratio, but we'll have to see how it works. And then we'll worry about this thermal water and the wastewater later, because the wastewater is a fairly low number, so I'm not too worried about that. And let's handle the cupric dust as well. Also requires a sodium hydroxide. And this requires the other 3 chunks. Otherwise, the recipe is similar. So there's that tier. The only thing we'd have to worry about getting there is thermal water, and we have thermal water. Just have to make a big old pipe for that, because that number is too high for drones, but well within what a pipe can do. But now you see that the cupric powder has gone down the chain and added its requirement to the 30 per second that we are asking for doing the ore sorting. So we want to be able to do all methods simultaneously if possible. So that's why that number got higher. So we'll have to see how it works here. But we'll grab the ferrous powder, and this is something that we're already doing. All it is a mixture that's ground up with a milling drum. So we put the speed modules in there, and the milling drum itself needs to be lubricated every time it's used. So we'll add that in there to figure out what the lubricant requirement is. And it looks like that last module doesn't help, so we'll do an efficiency. And that's basically what goes into that. So then we grab the cupric powder as well. Same thing. Slam it with speed modules. And let's take care of these as well, just so we can see our requirements. So 300 lubricant, which isn't necessarily a lot. That might be more than our factory is dealing with, so we might have to do something along the lines of those fish farming that I talked about earlier. But as always, we will see how it works. But now we're down to the basic tier here, which is just the crushed mixture. So we hit that, and that's just the 3 crushed mixtures added together. And it just goes into another crusher, which makes things easy. And unfortunately, we can't quite get it below 1 here, so we will have to have 2. And then that has an input of 25 of each. So if we do the cupric mixture as well, save modules, and we come back, and it looks like those numbers were good that I was working on here. It's not quite a full belt of each. It's close enough that a full belt is good, and not to mention that we were having kind of some amount of inserter limitation here until we get blue belts and inserters. So having these belts not require a quite full belt will help relieve stress on that and hopefully make it so there's no issues there. And we'll worry about the sorting methods later when we've got all of our input resources ready. But there we go. So now it'd be a good opportunity to go through the factory and kind of make sure all of these input numbers aren't crazy. Kind of the big one is the lubricant at 300. Presumably this is balanced. So what does this give us? Nowhere close. So there's our answer. It's nowhere close if they're all running at the same time. And it looks like it was kind of maxed out on fuel oil anyway, so we almost certainly are going to want to augment this with some fishing. Or something else that creates it. One thing we could do is just upgrade all these to blue. That would certainly increase the output, but then the question is, can all of this keep up? Because what does all of this do? It does 157. And it does multiply it a little bit, so it would be slightly higher. But it wouldn't be the 300 that we would need for all those to run at the same time. Not to mention that lubricant goes to other places of the factory, not just here. So we are seemingly getting to that point where we need to really increase lubricant production. It was also interesting that the recipe for the fish oil refining straight up makes lubricant. It doesn't make base mineral oil, which has to be turned into lubricant. So that's kind of nice. But it looks like the first tier of it does make mineral oil. Also, one interesting thing to note, that this first recipe is with a coal filter, and 150 oil goes in, and that's the same as ceramic filter, but the ceramic filter changes the output slightly. We get, instead of 100 fish oil, we get 125, and then we lose the mineral oil slightly. Can't say if that's better or worse, considering they both get turned into the lubricant, but I'm guessing the mineral oil is better because only some of the fish oil becomes lubricant where all of the base mineral oil does. That's kind of an interesting example where it's not necessarily true that higher tiers are the best way of doing things. And as far as the mineral oil goes, yeah, it's basically mining oil, which we've really avoided doing in any significant amount. And also basically what we're doing now, which doesn't really produce very much. So honestly, the oil that we have now is kind of just a small byproduct of what it could be. So I imagine if we do the fish oil, that will produce a ton of it. But we'll get all the ore stuff set up first, because this will allow the setup to at least run partially. And then after it's in place, we can upgrade it and test it later at full power. The other thing we're going to need is the thermal water. And the only place we're using it right now is on red algae. But it's easy to make. You just mine it out of the ground. And that's it. So, it would be a long pipe, but it's probably worth doing unless there's thermal water closer. Man, that is so many biters there. I guess they're sleeping, but that's a lot of biters. But, no, it actually looks like that's the closest thermal water, kind of by far. So, I think that's what we're going to have to use. So it'll just be a long pipe. What kind of output do these pumps have? Well, if that's to be believed, that is an awful lot, so maybe we should be putting productivity modules in there. There we go. So one other thing you probably noticed is this flashing. Circuit 2 is overloaded. Well, I noticed in between recordings, there's the flashing, that there was a problem with these fiberglass boards. Basically that the wire for LTN was not hooked up to this warehouse, and I kind of figured that out when I was trying to turn this into a storage warehouse. So basically the trains just kept unloading and filling this up to maximum capacity, and basically filled this up to maximum capacity too. And because it wasn't connected, this alarm wasn't capable of going off. So when I connected the wire, now it's like, it's overloaded. So I basically co-opted this second warehouse to try to empty this. But even still, it's going to take a long time to go through all this fiberglass. So I don't know, I might disconnect that at some point, but part of the point of having the warning is that it does flash at you, but if it's just constantly flashing, it might be kind of annoying. So I'm not sure what to do about that, but for now, it's slowly, I've got a little setup of belts here, slowly emptying it into this warehouse. Okay, so we know the types of machines that we're going to need now. Want to make sure we have everything. We want to double check though we have the chemical plant 3s, we certainly have the flotation cells. And we have the powderizers now. So we've got to make sure chemical plant 3s are in here. And they almost certainly aren't, because here's chemical plant 2 and it just stops here. So that probably means that we have space for number 3 in there. We're also going to need a ton of landfill, so it's good that we have it. But for now, we can build the setup near our bus where resources are close. And then once we have an idea of how big it is, we can commit to that amount of landfill. It'll be much nicer to build this setup compared to the other ore refining, because now we don't have a restriction of a certain amount of space that it has to fit into, like this square right here. So it'll be a lot easier. So we need to do the tier 3. I guess I'll send this down to 50 because we tend not to need very many machines these days. And just push it down. Change that to 3. Yeah, that flashing is already kind of bothering me, so I'll probably just have to disable it. But let's see, I want to put this out of the network, although the network is covering everything these days. So, alright, well, we'll copy 1 over there. Does that work? Did that confuse the robots? It looks like it worked, because it doesn't say they're asking for any deliveries here. Alright, so where are all the robots? Oh, they're coming. I guess they were just exploding. Oh, here's a personal robot that found something. It's just slowly following us. And that robot takes the orb away. So close. Alright, well, it seems to be running. So let it go. And yeah, this flashing is already bothering me, so I will turn off the alarm related to that. And I'll have to remember. And we've finally gone through those fiberglass boards, which basically only go into modules and circuit boards at this point. But that's going to be a while if we have like 200,000-ish fiberglass boards. That's a lot of boards. Also, I thought this would be closer. Even with jetpack, it takes a little while. Probably should put some more teleportation things up, but I think it kind of takes a long time to build them because they need a lot of batteries. So we'll worry about that a little later. But let's see, how to disable this. Well, probably just unhooking the wire will do it. And this is emptying out. It'll take forever, but I think it will eventually fit in these two warehouses. And I have some logic set up here to give priority to this one, so this will empty as quickly as possible. The robots are like, we just wanted to help. They keep finding biter orbs all over the place. That already made our 50. So let's figure out a build here. Well, I can see right off the bat, they're almost certainly going to be inserter limited here. Because I feel like Hellmod was kind of wrong with stuff. It says the stack inserter is 13.85. And if we had 2 of them, that would be enough. So I'm not sure what's going on with Hellmod, but it seems like it's just a little too low for its estimates on how many inserters you need. But we probably want to build this with some space, just in case we need more than just these 2 machines. So let's grab some crushers wherever they happen to be. Guess they're over here. Surprisingly, we don't need very many, so we'll just take 10, I guess. And let's start building. We don't know how much space it's going to take, but luckily all of this is covered by robots. Or at least construction robots, but let's claim this area right here as the upper boundary. And that will coincide with the bottom of the bus here. This will come from way down there, but I don't think the setup's going to be so big that it needs to do that. Although, considering that the resources are down here, we may want to consider having a linear setup where they start here and go up, because the ore is already down here. So instead of sending the ore here and then all the way up to the top and then like sideways or down, if we start the crushers here and move the ore up, that might make more sense. So knowing that, I'm just going to claim this area down here, I guess, for the crushers. And then we'll see how it works here. So we need 2 of them, making the ferrous and the cupric. And they need 1 stack inserter for each side. And that's really all there is to it, if those numbers are to be believed. And then, in theory, 5 inserters, but what does this say? Well, that's interesting. I wonder if this default number it's giving is the chest-to-chest rate, where when it's actually hooked up with belts nearby, the throughput number it gives is different. So, does it change? It does. So you can see how it's 4 there. And then I wonder if I put faster belts, it becomes, yeah, 6.2. And then with nothing, it's at 13. And it probably won't change with chess. Yeah, because that's the ideal number. So it's going from a belt to a chest. So that's how it's getting the 8.57. Might be able to go over the other crushers later and kind of do this math, but that gives us an idea. Because in total, we need to process 25 ore. So 25 divided by 8.57 tells us we need about 3 of them. Whereas this one is way less, so that might be the chest-to-chest number. And that's just barely 3. And because inserters can't always pick up or place things, that the, because this is assuming full belt compression, that we probably want even more. So I'm actually thinking we'll want a total of 4 inserters. This is kind of an interesting way of looking at machines. And this kind of applies when you have small machines and high throughputs, is it's less about how many machines and more about how many inserters do you need. So according to this, we would need basically 4. So as a result, we can kind of come in here and change these. So that's more than 4, so we'll put a speed module in, and then an efficiency, and another one, because we're not at negative 80% yet. And I think that would be better. Still says 2, but we just wanted to figure out the number of modules here. And I will leave the space in here just because there's no reason to smash them in here because they're so compact. So with that, that gives us our about 4 inserters. And it'd be nice to get rid of the flashing here. There we go, to make sure they're all lined up. So we can do another test where we have 12 inserters with 8.57. And in reality it's somewhat less than that, but that's about 102. And we need 25 times 3, so we actually need 75, but we have a capacity for 102, and that seems pretty balanced. And yeah, this output is fairly high to where you could use loaders for it, but I try to avoid loaders when I can, unless I absolutely have to have them. Plus, when the setups get bigger, having a bunch of loaders on each machine, especially when you have like 3 inputs, can get kind of wonky. Imagine having all these loaders, but then you have to have, you know, things being split to each one. It gets kind of complicated, but I don't know. I like loaders, but I don't want to lean on them too heavily because, I mean, they can just completely break the game if you just don't need inserters for anything anymore. So I try to still use the inserters when they work. So we have all of that. Yeah, this is the cupric, and this is the ferric, but it's the same thing. Numbers are the same. Where we have an identical output now. So we need something similar to this, and it's going on 3 different belts. So we can probably do something like this, basically in the same way. But they're inserting on the same side of the belt, so we want to alternate near and far as if possible. And that should be pretty good, at least for this side. We're going to have our 3 belts of random colors going into the 3 belts of just the one color. And then we'll basically need the exact same thing, but on the other side. I don't know how much we're going to want to smash this all in here, but whatever. We'll put it in with 2 spaces in between for now. And the robots are on their way. But now we need to handle crushing the mixture into powder, which is done here, and we might have more inserter limitations because the ore powderizer is even smaller. It's only 2 squares big. So let's switch all these. So we only have 2 squares for input and 2 squares for output. And maybe if we did an assembly machine in the middle, we could make this work, because if we had 2 of these like this, and an assembling machine in here, they could insert into the assembling machine, giving their drums to get redone, and then we'd have 2 inserters for input on this side and 2 inserters for output. If we used a common belt like this for the resources, then these would only have access to a single inserter for input and output on this side. Or the belts could have to come in here, but just having the machine in the middle and doing direct insertion is probably the easy way. So, looking at inserter limitations, we need to handle 45 per second. And we're going to be able to do 8.57. So 45 divided by 8.57. And that gives us a number of 5.25. So it certainly won't work with 2 speed modules in here. but with 8 it probably would. So we'll put the efficiency in there. And then between them, for every 2 machines, they could have 1 assembling machine in the middle. We don't need to have this be super fast, we just need it to be within 4. And that actually seems pretty good here. So now we have a general idea of how big it needs to be. So we're going to have between each of these 2 boxes, plus this, making the milling drums, and the rate is probably fairly low. In fact, we can kind of just put the modules in to find out. So speed. Put those in there, but it looks like I didn't use every module slot on this. Since we're already at negative 50%, let's do pollution. Did I use all of these? Yes. So what kind of numbers would this need? It would need 4 per second if it was running at full speed. And direct insertion with no belt is much faster, but it's not quite enough with the yellow. So we would need the red here. So let's go down, down, and up, up. And they just run at full speed, just taking care of what they can. And we can get those pipes figured out in a bit. But then we put this on the other side, and we kind of want it to look very similar. And these are all long-handed when they don't need to be. So that seems good. So the input belt is going to come up here, and because we want to process some of this, if you see here we're picking up 30 of the mixture per second, but we are producing 75 because the other 45 is coming up here. So some of this is going to be split to the side, probably with a sorting warehouse to make it easy. And then our 2-ish belts of resources are going to come up here. And since these are one-sided, we might as well do this one one-sided instead of having one on the left and one on the right here, just to make it look kind of symmetrical. Guess it all depends on how big it ends up being. Then it has an output, but this needs to be hooked up to something. Probably just put a pipe right there for now. The output is also 2-ish belts. And we need filter inserters here. So the long-handed one there. Not long-handed here. But some of these need to be nears. So we'll make these the nears. And we do need to switch around all these filters, but it might be easier to do that with a constant combinator later. So the only thing we need to set right now as a filter is this one right here. Because we want to make sure it doesn't take out the ore. We just want the used milling drum to be taken out. These ones can be set, but since I so happen to have more green wire, let's use the green wire. And we'll get all those hooked up in a bit. But that should be our 2. So then we need a whole nother one to do 4. And that would be kind of long if it was just a straight line going up. Compared to this anyway, which is very square shaped. That's kind of what I always try to go for. Are things that are very square. Square things tend to fit better in the factory than long lines. So, knowing that, we'll grab this, flip it over to the other side, and put it on there. But because they are now separated, they don't need to be pulling from the same belts anymore. And neither do these outputs. They just need to alternate near and far here. So I'll switch them all back to regular and probably have it to the set filter thing here. Then all we need to do is make sure that one of these is a near on every machine. And then how are these wires doing? Are they mostly connected? Seems like it. Just got to connect the middle. Connect them across. And now, the constant combinator, which we can plop anywhere. Let's just put it there. Now we should be able to set this to what we want them to be. And in this case, it's the powder. So there we go. All the outputs are set. The drum ones don't really need to change, so they can stay the same. The 2 belts of input come in, and then 2 belts of output go out. Then they'll probably just combine up here. We'll figure out how that works later. And these probably don't need to be undergrounds. We can just extend these out. Then put the undergrounds here and worry about getting the fluid in there later. We've got a setup, but we need 2 of them. So we'll grab it and then layer it on right here, which makes it nice and square. Wait for the bots to get here, and then it'll all be good. And seems like it's a decent shape. Guess we'll just kind of work over here. We can always kind of see how big this is ending up being compared to the space we have available. And as you see, it's nowhere close to as big as it can get. I mean, it could basically go all the way down here. You probably don't want to extend past this point because the train theoretically could go this way someday. But all the way down to here is fine, so we have tons of space. And you can kind of see how technically this fits in the old area right now, but we haven't been trying to make it super small. But you can kind of see here where it's better not to try to make it fit in there, and instead just build a new setup out here and reclaim this area, because we may need more area for making these catalysts, for example, because that was kind of confined. The robots are almost done. Fantastic, so we can switch this to the Kubrick. And then change the combinator to the Kubrick as well. And now they're all changed. So that was easy. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to work on expanding our sodium hydroxide production to assist in making the tier 3 ore mixtures. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.